I am on your shoulders, you raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up to more than I can be.
Repentance is a changing of your mindset, the way you perceive the world, the way you view this world, the way you view your neighbor, the way you learn how to love your neighbor as you love yourself. I studied religion when I was in college and also double majored in psychology. So what I found out in psychology was a wonderful professor. He said that a lot of people end up majoring in psychology. How many of you majored in psychology or minored in psychology or read a book in a bookstore one time? I remember my professor saying, and this really resonated with me, and I said, yes, this is very true. My psychology professor, Dr. New, he said, you know, a lot of people get into psychology, and a lot of people decide they're going to minor or major in psychology because they're so messed up. Yes, that's exactly why I'm doing this. But I remember when I was studying, of all the different types of therapy, the different approaches to psychological therapy, I remember two being compared early on in one of the introduction classes. You had cognitive psychology, cognitive therapy, and you had the behavioral psychology, behavioral therapy. And now, at first, though, I think those two were juxtaposed and pitted against one another. But I think there can be some meaningful, eclectic combination of the two. The cognitive therapists, they had this idea that if you could change the way you think, if you could change your mindset, the way you perceive the world, then your behavior would follow along. Your behavior would follow suit. I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You change the way you perceive the world, the way you see the world, and then your behavior follows suit. And then the behavioral psychologists, they said, no, you need to change the way you behave. You need to change your activities, and then your mind will follow your actions. Well, I think we all know that those two go hand in hand. And real renewal, real change in our life happens when we've changed both our mindset and our behavior. And I think that's repentance. I think that's renewal in your life. It's a process of meditating, of reflecting, of contemplating, and looking at the world, and learning from your mistakes, learning from your misdeeds, and renewing your sense of purpose. And then your life can change. It's not an immediate change in most circumstances, but it's a beginning. But then too, also in what you engage in can change you. I've found that the most powerful transformation in my life personally has occurred because I've been engaged in activities. I found that the most meaningful growth that I've had in my life has occurred because I've been a part of justice movements, or I've been a part of connections with a church. I've been a part of something that has worked in my life to transform who I am. And I think that's the importance of being connected to a church. I think that's the importance of being engaged in an activity. Next week, we're getting ready to think about Martin Luther King. Already, probably you've seen some documentaries on TV recounting the significance of his life and all that he was able to accomplish in the various civil rights movements in this country. And what an extraordinary part of history in our country. And I was thinking about King, and I was thinking about this idea that really his engagement in the Montgomery boycott, the bus boycott, really changed something fundamental in who he was as a person, who he was, who he became as an activist. And I was thinking about that. And there's one piece from a sermon that he preached that really stays with me. And he was a young preacher at this time, and he was just getting involved in the Montgomery bus boycott, and he was getting threats on the phone, murderous threats, telling him to stop, racial slurs. And he would get these calls during the middle of the night. And usually he was up wrestling with his thoughts or trying to plan out something, and his wife and his daughter were asleep. And he had one of these phone calls that was that really struck him to the core. And he had this part of the sermon. I want to share this little brief part of the sermon that he reflected on after receiving this phone call. He said, "I sat at that table thinking about that little girl, his daughter, and thinking about the fact that she could be taken away from me at any minute. And I started thinking about a dedicated, devoted, and loyal wife who was over there asleep. And I got to the point I couldn't take it anymore. I was weak. And I discovered then that religion had to become real to me. And I had to know God for myself. And I bowed down over the cup of coffee, and I will never forget it. I prayed a prayer, and I prayed out loud that night, and I said, Lord, I'm down here trying to do the right thing. I think I'm right. I think the cause that we represent is right. But Lord, I must confess I am weak now. I am faltering. I am losing my courage. And it seemed at that moment that I could hear an inner voice saying to me, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth, and lo, I will be with you, even until the end of the world. And I heard the voice of Jesus still saying, fight on. He promised never to leave me. He promised never to forsake me. He promised never to leave me alone. Never, never alone. Never, never alone. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. I thought about King in that moment, about everything that was riding on his commitment, on his engagement. Of course, there were other people, hundreds of other people, thousands of other people that would join the civil rights movement, people that we will never know their names, never know their faces, but they were equally a significant part of the civil rights movement. But the thing that King was able to accomplish in this world, and other people with King, as significant as that is, I think too, their engagement in an activity bigger than themselves changed who they were in a positive way, in a meaningful way. Now, we have opportunities to engage in activities that change and transform us. Being a part of a community of faith is a great place to start.